So one of the major challenges to doing the type of integrative research that we do, where we're trying to go from very early basic science to new therapeutics, is the funding that is required to do that. And we have been very fortunate to receive generous funding from a number of sources that cover that entire span. So a large proportion of our funding, the majority of our funding, comes from the National Institutes of Health, NIMH, and NINDS, which is the Neurological Disorders Institute, have been very generous supporters of our research. But then we've been able to obtain funding from several foundations who are specifically interested in diseases that we study and developing new medicines, like the Michael J. Fox Foundation for our Parkinson's research, the Harrington Foundation, the Alzheimer Drug Discovery Foundation, and others that have disease-specific interests that really fit with our research. And then philanthropy is absolutely critical. So we've been very fortunate to have individuals that are really passionate about impacting specific disease states that have been generous in funding our research. And without that philanthropy, we could never do what we do, because none of the traditional funding institutions fund these different aspects. We have to piece it together. I cannot say enough about the Brown family, who has generously supported our work in Parkinson's research, the Warren family that has generously supported our research in schizophrenia especially, but other psychiatric disorders. Their support has been tremendous, and it's bringing all of these sources of support together, plus support from the pharmaceutical industry. When we partner with companies to advance new medicines, they then support our research heavily for the very high cost of taking these early molecules all the way to a point of clinical development. So with all of these sources of funding, we're able to do what we do, and it would not be possible if any one of those pieces was not part of the puzzle.
The NIH is great, but it's very structured. Yeah. And then the private funding is more like, we believe in you. Yeah. Here is some money for you to just figure out what you think is important. And those are where breakthroughs can be made, because they're saying, you do what you do, and we believe in you, and now you can kind of apply this money to anything you think is important. And that kind of freedom is really important for making breakthroughs on things that maybe we didn't expect, rather than saying, we have a hypothesis, here's our hypothesis, this is how we're going to test it. That's actually a critical component, but the first component maybe will be saying, we don't have a hypothesis yet, but let us get this big data that's going to let us computationally analyze it and figure out what we think is important. And it may identify a new target that you couldn't identify with NIH funding, but then that new target, you take it to the NIH and say, we have this target, here's the data to back it up, now let us get the money to really refine exactly how we're going to approach using this as a treatment. And so they're really complementary, and they're both really critical to scientific discovery.
So NIH support is essential for our research right now, but we're going through an era where my lab is studying primary human tissues, and a lot of the work is discovery work. And so we're working right at the cutting edge, and some of the critical funding for my lab has been from the Vanderbilt Ingram Cancer Center, the Vanderbilt ambassadors, the Hematology Helping Hands Fund, and this work has been for pilot studies that have created new technologies or allowed us to move tools that came out of immunology into solid tumor or other types of cancer research. And so without this pilot funding that really got those projects going, the project never would have started. It was too new, too out there for the NIH funding. What we really needed was that early pilot funding to get the work going, to get the preliminary data, and then put together the NIH grant. And so we and our collaborators have been doing these types of pilots, and now we're starting to see they're really bearing fruit. We're seeing the return on that early investment with the pilot funds. And so we really have to thank the Cancer Center and the Vanderbilt ambassadors for taking the risk on these exciting new ideas where we're translating things into human tissue samples.
So funding is essential for our research, especially for a new assistant professor like me. So we depend a lot on the National Institutes of Health support of our research, also of some private organizations. For instance, I have been supported by the American Brain Tumor Association and the American Heart Association, and this is why sometimes understanding how those basic mechanisms can affect disease are important too, and they can be, these research questions can be supported by these kind of mechanisms as well. But for the most part, funding is what really moves your lab, and so it is essential for what we do.